Good Monday morning to you all. I was just looking through this Unit 3, and wanted to talk you through a few things just so we're all clear on expectations, but also so we can kind of start that little dialogue that we create so well. By the way, I'm really enjoying the discussions. If there's ever a way that you can get those discussion posts out earlier in the week so that more people have time to respond to you, that's super. And also, don't shy away from going back in through the weeks. We want to keep that flexible structure. I know things aren't due until Sunday, but if you can think of anything that's discussion related out there earlier, and then also just as we're responding, don't be shy about going back in and responding to something that was maybe posted a week or so ago, or even in the previous unit, so that as our own learning forms, that we are actually practicing what we preach. We're talking about formative instruction mostly this unit, and part of this discussion is our formative assessment. And I say it that way because we are assessing it. I mean, you are getting a grade for participating in discussion board, but I think it's really key to watch how our thinking on a topic changes and evolves and morphs into what it is that we become. Sometimes as teachers and as learners, we don't have a chance to really reflect. We just move on to the next thing, check down off the list, and we don't really notice how we got from point A to point B. I notice about myself on something that I feel like I have a really good grasp on. I sometimes forget things that I knew about my topic earlier in my journey as a learner, and then somehow in the formation of where I gotten to, I've forgotten something key. So I'm encouraging you right now to go back in. Don't be restrained by the unit we're in. Go back and look through some of your thoughts, some of the thoughts of others, and so forth. Okay, I'm going to look with you, if I can, at the course content for this unit. So I'm just clicking on the learning units, just as you might be right now too. And I want to do an overview of assignments, and then I just kind of want to do like a little mini lecture, kind of peek preview type thing of what we're going to be doing this week in terms of where our minds are going to be traveling. Okay, so the checklist includes basically 4 activities. The first activity is going to ask you to reflect on 3 articles that are written that are loaded into the course content, and then to choose a 4th of your own chosen from our virtual library in our classroom. The first article is more laying the foundation for formative assessments and what they are from an academia perspective. It does not really talk about online learners, and so your challenge is going to be, as you read through that formative assessment piece, to anticipate what this looks like in the online setting. I know you've heard me say that quite a few times this course, but I think there's a lot of value in reframing what we're reading as we're reading it into that online and blended setting. The second thing is that second article is about the online and blended classroom. And the third article pays specific attention to engaging the adult learner. And I think that's really significant. Some of you have shared that most of your students are going to be adult students. And there's definitely a different approach that I take when I'm teaching you all as adults versus the high school students I teach online. I use some of the same tools, but I definitely approach them differently and more deliberately. So those are the 3 readings that are going to go along with activity 3.1, and then in addition to that, you'll be choosing a reading of your own from the virtual library. And it's just a discussion forum asking you to choose a formative and when and why to choose formative and then summative assessment. While we're focusing on formative assessment, we're not saying that summative assessment's bad. We're just saying, when are we using each one, and are we really purposeful in how we use them? Deliberate, intentional instruction, right? The second activity for the first week, this week, is a student guide that you're going to create in a blog. And in this blog, you're going to show students how to use some technology tools. And this is where it might be a little bit of a learning curve for some of you. I know some of you have a huge background in online learning, and others, this is a new field. Maybe you've never had an online class or dabbled with this. So we have some resources for you. And one just word of I don't know if caution is the right word, that's probably too strong of a word, but just one thought. There are zillions, that's one of my kids' words, of apps out there and products out there for the online learner. All of a sudden that market has exploded. And it's sort of like my kids. We have a locked password on our kids' iPods. And so if they want to add a new app, they have to ask. And I'm not kidding, I probably get 5 app requests a week. And in the next week when they're asking for 5 new ones, I say, what happened to the ones that we loaded last week? And we're trying to teach them to be discerning and decide what apps work best for them. My point is that they often will say, well, that wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so too these apps. And sometimes you'll find an app that really works well for you, but then you find another one that looks nice and shiny and you really want to use it. Ask yourself if it's purposeful, if you have a need for that, or if you're just gravitating to something new. I think there's something to be said about trying new technologies, but there's also something to be said that once you find something that works, don't feel like you're being a stick in the mud by sticking with it, because sometimes you find that thing that works for you well. I'll give the example of I use a lot of video apps in my teaching, and one that I really love is called Animoto, and it allows me to pull pictures and then do some concise verbiage on each slide. It's more like a fun slideshow set to music. And I like it for my high school students particularly because it's engaging, it's captivating, and it's a tool that's easy enough that they could use as part of a formative assessment to show what they know in a concise way that's a presentation style. One of the articles we read talks about using something other than a paper to create a final product or a formative assessment or a summative assessment. And so it's one I like. There are a lot of video tools out there, but I like this one. It works for me. I know it. I can help students navigate it. That's what we're trying to move towards here, is that not that you find, the relentless search for the app, but you find an app that works for you and that you can teach out and that you can see fitting your style of teaching. So just kind of a encouragement there. In the next week then we'll have 2 assignments as well as per our pattern. There's a discussion feedback assignment where you go back to the previous week and give one another feedback on your discussion board and your blog. And then there's also the assessment portfolio part 3. And we're moving on now to looking more specifically at adding to your wiki with explaining a way that you would like to use the assessment tool that you find. So this piece that you're doing in the first week, finding an assessment tool and laying it out for students, you're going to drag that into your assessment portfolio in a more polished way, and that's going to be something that you kind of have as a package deal that you can look at and hopefully use in your future teaching online. Okay, I mentioned that I wanted to kind of touch on a few just kind of mini lecture points, so I made some notes as I was reviewing materials and getting ready for this week, and just wanted to share a few things with you. One thing that struck me in one of the articles was talking about the purpose of assessments and why do we even have assessments. And I think that this is one of those things that if I could look back on my earliest teaching and consider the reasoning I had, I think that in nice words it would be data collection, but I do think that I was in my earlier teaching, I needed grades for a grade book. And I hope that my thinking has evolved a little bit since then. But one of the considerations that I like to kind of pause at is, what am I doing to help students recognize how they think about their own learning? How can I draw them into the process of being active and engaged learners in control of their learning? We talk a lot about intrinsic motivation, and if we could just magically have each child wired to be motivated. But what is my role in that? And I think part of that is, I've noticed in teaching even my face-to-face college students that, or my traditional college students in their undergraduate, I'll ask them, what were you thinking about when you were writing this paper? And I don't know that they've ever thought about what they were thinking about. and it's interesting, how can we in an online setting engage students to think about what they're thinking about? To not just be on autopilot, to not just be mesmerized by our excellent teaching and our excellent class, but to really be self-aware, to know where they're at as a learner. one of the things that we can do, as one of the articles mentions, is put pre-tests out there to make students aware of where their deficits and where their areas of excellency are. But we can't just put a pretest out there and expect it to work magic. And the other thing about that pretest that's sort of scary, the one article that's going to talk about how the online setting is great for a pre-assessment, and sometimes if you had I know as a language arts teacher, I would sometimes call them anticipation activities, okay? That's great because it kind of gets all that schema activated, but what am I doing with it for them then? I can gather data, but what am I doing to make them aware, to look back at that assessment and really see where to really pull the data they need to understand their own learning profile. And I think the other piece of that, where I was going with this in a second ago, is that it's not as easy as the article makes it sound, in my opinion. I guess it's a popular time to call me today. It's not as easy as it sounds, because what it sounds like in this article is that you can just put this pre-assessment in and then you know how to build your class. But most of you have your classes pretty much built by the time the student's taking the pre-assessment. So how flexible, what kind of flex are you going to build into your online class? We can't think of our online classes as completely static, right? So what are we going to do to add in or take out to meet those individual students' needs? And you know that no two students are built alike. So what are we going to do to build in scaffolding so that the student who's just ready to soar in the class can do that and can go deeper and farther than we ever dreamed, and when that student who's just struggling and struggling can make it through with that passing grade? So many things to consider here. When do we assess? And our assessments send messages, right? Especially to that adult learner. My adult learners are on me about feedback. They want to know, and if I give them a piece of feedback that they're not sure about, they let me know. That's something that, because we are adults and we have a pretty self-aware perspective of where we're at going into a course, we have more at stake, right? But we also have more self-knowledge, more awareness, and therefore we have different expectations of somebody giving feedback to us. I think back about times that I let myself be talked to in a certain way by someone that I never would think of allowing that to happen to me as my adult self. But as a younger person, I kind of just took it. And I think two things there. As we're working with adult learners, we have to be aware of what messages we're sending with our assessments, but we're also trying to train up these younger students, these ones with less experience, to be self-actualized, right? Not to sound like the psychologist, but we want them to be definitely that person who challenges the instructor in their learning in a way that is positive, not just insubordinate, right? A couple other notes I had here. As we talk about assessments as evidence of learning, and I think the thing that we have to be cautious of with this is that sometimes I think I'll set up an assessment piece that I really think will show me what I need to know about my students' learning, but maybe I'm asking the wrong questions. Very carefully building these questions and assessments in a way that really draws out what it is I'm teaching, not just, and making sure that I'm teaching what it is that I'm trying to get out of my students. I had a really good master's level professor who asked me once, you say you teach a lot in small groups, to put that in online and blended terms. So let's say we're really pushing collaboration. Are we then going to assess collaboratively? Shouldn't our practice of how we get there fit how we assess? I actually did, from that experience, try a group test, and I may have mentioned that previously in another little introduction that I gave you. But making sure that you really have whittled down what it is that you want to see growth in, to make sure you're really measuring in a way that will really show you what you want to know. I talked about engagement. How about attempts? Let's say you make some multiple choice quizzes in your classroom. They're super easy to grade. They're great for immediate student feedback. Especially my younger students love them because they're one and done. I think that they love seeing that immediate grade come up. How many attempts are you going to allow your students? What is it that you want out of this assessment? Do you want students to study beforehand? And so are you going to penalize them for having multiple attempts on a quiz? Maybe have, okay, you can retake this, but you can't get as much credit. It's going to be the average of all your scores. You're going to have 3 tries, best of 3. Just recently took a class myself, and the professor allowed us to take a quiz multiple times, as many times as we wanted. The best score won, and he even labeled the quiz itself a scavenger hunt. Well, you can bet I did none of the reading beforehand. I went into the quiz, pulled up the reading in another screen, and read and pulled out answers. I'll tell you what though, for what I assume this professor wanted, I think he got. I had to dig for answers, and I had multiple chances so I could get things wrong, but the perfectionist in me wanted to keep going back and doing better, and there was a lot of formative assessment happening there. I don't believe he wanted me to memorize and really know, in this case, a college handbook for a course I'm going to be teaching, but he wanted me to know where I could find the answers in the future, and I definitely know now where I can find those answers just from practicing it in the form of an assessment. So as you're going through this, obviously, I bet you're pulling out ideas that have worked for you as a instructor, have worked for you as a student, and you bet that I'm super self-conscious about this course because I'm saying, hey, this is how assessments should be done, and I realize that you might see gaps in the way I'm doing assessments. And in fact, I just got called to task on one of my face-to-face classes. They said, you never gave us a rubric for this paper. Good point. I never did. I am going to give them a second chance, just so you know. I'm playing fair. And this time I'll give them the rubric ahead of time. So some things to consider, just to kind of wrap up here, is what is my purpose here? What am I hoping the learning outcome to be? And am I truly teaching in that way or creating learning opportunities prior to the assessment, or am I using the assessment as part of that formative learning process? When do I place these? How often do students need quizzes, and does the age of the student I'm teaching also play into this? How often do they need feedback to keep themselves engaged, or keep our students engaged? Does my ends match my means? How do I activate students' learning and activate their own self-awareness of how they're learning through assessments, through these formative assessments? Sometimes we like to call them, by the way, short cycle assessments, where it's just over a microcosm of information. How am I really getting evidence of learning, or am I getting evidence of students who can know how to take certain kinds of tests well? Or am I seeing evidence that a test question was misleading? You know, how can I break down those questions to make sure that I'm really getting the evidence I want, and a profile of the learner as a whole? And that's, again, why we want multiple types of assessments, but why formative assessments are so key. And, you know, how many attempts? What format? What about a pre and post test? Should the pre and post test be the same, or is that too easily manipulated? These are decisions you're going to have to make, and hopefully the readings this week and the projects this week will help you get there. Remember, as you're looking for assessment tools, that there's no one that's going to be perfect unless you've created it, and 2, that make sure it's something that you can live with, that's accessible to you, and that you could teach out to other students on how to use it. In closing, one last observation on assessments. Recently I gave a pre-assessment using an outside testing tool. I'm not going to name the tool right now. And I had a number of students who scored a 0%. This led me to kind of question what was going on. I gave students a call, and the assessment tool actually logged them out in the middle of the assessment and assigned them a 0. One of the things that we'll have to always work with in teaching with technology are those technology glitches, right? So again, in the spirit of looking at all angles of online and blended instruction, consider for yourselves which of these questions you want to pursue the most, and I'm learning so much from you. I cannot wait to see your responses to this week's assignments. Have a great week.